In 1961, a couple was on their way home from a vacation when they were confronted by strange beings. Their encounter and the following story made national news and shook both of them to their core. The story of Barney and Betty Hill. This is Red Web. So Betty and Barney Hill were a couple in their early 40s from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Now, this will come back later, but it's worth noting that they were an interracial couple, which was very uncommon for the 1960s.
Love to see it.
Yeah, love to see it. The couple hadn't been on vacation for a very long time and spontaneously decided to go on a 3-day road trip up to Niagara Falls and visit the Montreal area. On September 19th, 1961, this is when everything kind of kicked off. They started their drive back to Portsmouth, and they had planned to get home around 3 a.m. Now, around 10:30, just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty saw a bright light moving in the sky somewhere between the moon and where Jupiter was located at that time. But the light only seemed to grow, becoming brighter as it started to move a little bit more erratically. Betty asked Barney to pull the car over so they could get a closer look at that object, and they stopped at a picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. Betty, looking through binoculars, saw what she thought was a flying craft, and at first, Barney believed it was just an airplane. But suddenly, the craft turned to their location, and Barney then changed his mind. They got back in the car and quickly drove away toward Franconia Notch, a narrow mountain pass in the White Mountains. And they started driving slowly when they saw the craft again so they could try to observe it. They saw it fly over a signal tower on Cannon Mountain, and they said it looked like it was rotating. It had flashing lights, multicolored lights, and that was all before they noticed that it was actually descending upon them at that time. Barney stopped in the middle of the highway, and it hovered silently above them about 100 feet above the ground. Well, Barney gets out of his car. I don't know what he's thinking, and he describes the craft as large and pancake-shaped, and they see about 8 to 11 entities looking down on them.
What?
Now,
It's like a minivan of aliens.
Yeah, their whole family's in there. At this point, they said most of these figures had turned, walking towards something in the ship, but one stayed behind. Okay, so Barney at that point said that he saw bat-like wings with red lights outstretched from the vessel and came down from the ship. Gut instincts back in check, he yells at Betty. He says they're going to capture us, and he runs back to the car. Now, as they drive, Betty opens the window to look at the craft, and they heard strange noises such as like beeping and buzzing noises. Then they said they experienced a dullness of their consciousness. And when they finally came to, they heard the same beeping and buzzing noises, and they were on the same road, but they were 35 miles away. And all they could recall at this point was that they had taken a sharp turn at some point in the car, stopped in front of a fiery orb, and then that was it.
I would go to a doctor. Who knows what happened, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, but like to have two people share this very vivid experience.
I mean, maybe they're in it together.
Maybe. So when they arrived home, it wasn't until that moment when they realized that they were arriving 2 hours later than they expected, meaning that they had lost 2 hours of time somewhere in that kind of blackout state. And at this point, they started noticing other things, right? For example, the strap on the binoculars was ripped. Their watches had both stopped working and would never work again. Barney's shoes had been incredibly scuffed, and Betty's dress was torn and had a very strange pink powder on it. And the final detail that's a bit odd here is that shiny circles appeared on the trunk of their car. And what's even weirder is when you bring a compass to these new shiny circles, you know, like buff spots on the back of their trunk, the compass would start spinning as if it was interfering with the magnetic field.
And was this all like verified by, I don't know, scientists?
I mean,
like
that
authorities
is a
and
valid question. That is a valid question. And Betty at this time seemed to believe that they had seen a UFO. But anytime she brought that up, Barney wouldn't hear it. Didn't want to talk about that. Nope, there's no UFOs, there's no aliens in play here. But a few days later, 2 days actually, on September 21st, Betty finally reported the incident to the nearby Peace Air Force Base. Wanting to take them seriously, Betty, when talking to them, left out certain details, so that way, obviously, they wouldn't get laughed at and turned away. And Major Paul Henderson actually contacted her the next day, and after hearing their account, said that they had probably just misidentified Jupiter, which, I'll be honest, I've stargazed a few times in my day, and I'm not going to say, Jupiter hasn't ever leapt out at me with 8 to 11 men and knocked me out. Like, I'm just saying. 10 days after the incident, Betty then began having strange nightmares. She said that they were all incredibly vivid and very distressing, very disturbing. Betty ultimately, over the next 5 nights from there, had 5 dreams, 1 per night, and she only told her husband Barney about the very first one. She took notes on these dreams, and here's kind of what those notes outline. In each dream, she was with Barney in the forest. She saw 5-foot-tall beings with gray skin, dark eyes, and hair. These individual 5-foot-tall beings were also wearing shiny dark uniforms. A man examined Betty's body and later took her to a leader, as she called him, that spoke to her. She looked at a book with strange symbols, and when she asked the leader where they had come from, he showed her a map with dotted stars, basically a holographic map. And this is when Betty came to believe that the night they couldn't remember was the night that they were abducted by aliens. That these dreams were actually memories, that these dreams were telling her something, and she finally felt like she could get a little bit of closure on maybe what had happened. In 1966, a winged creature with glowing red eyes was spotted in the small Appalachian town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It was continuously sighted for a year before a tragedy befell the town, and then it mysteriously disappeared. Today, we're going to talk about the mystery of the Mothman. This is Red Web. Let's dive into the sightings. Clendenin, West Virginia was the first instance of this creature. It was first spotted by 3 grave diggers on November 12th of 1966. They said it soared overhead. But this is the only spotting of this year in Clendenin, West Virginia. The rest all took place in a town called Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The next sighting was from 2 couples. They were drag racing in a 1957 Chevy at night in what was known as the TNT area, kind of like Dynamite TNT.
Okay.
Not the channel or whatever else.
TNT knows drama.
They do. Maybe this is, no, anyway. November 15th, 1966, this is when this went down. Just to expand a little bit on this TNT area, it was a top secret government facility that was used to create explosives for the atomic bombs that the United States was making around that time. Employees were driven there on a bus with blacked out windows so they couldn't see exactly where they were going. This area, this government facility, was abandoned after Hiroshima in 1945. In the area, there are still old factories and scattered bunkers where explosives were stored, and they still have leftover materials, and we'll kind of dive a little bit more into that later on. But in 1966, this area was converted to the McClintock Wildlife Management Area. So they're taking something that used to be a bit nefarious and turning it into something a little bit nicer.
Ain't nothing wrong with that.
Managing that wildlife.
Trying to turn it around? Okay.
Yeah, so that's the TNT area we're talking about. The 2 couples that were drag racing in the area, we have Roger and Linda Scarberry, and we have Steve and Mary Millette. They noticed some strange movement in the abandoned munitions plant, as you might do when speeding through in the night. And they drove away, and as they turned to go away, something began chasing their cars. And they described this as a large flying man with 10-foot wings, gray, appeared not to have a neck, and when the headlights hit the creature, its eyes began to glow, or they lit up with a glowing red.
Huh.
When they returned again to town, they did tell the police what they saw, and they reported it at 2 a.m., so not too long after they saw it. Deputy Millard Halstead knew the couples personally, and so he believed their story. The police went searching that night but didn't find anything. A few days later, 2 volunteer firefighters saw, quote, a large bird with red eyes. The next sighting was by Marcella Bennett on November 16th of 1966, all clustered together, by the way. These all happened within a 1-week span of each other. Marcella and her family said they saw the creature while visiting friends that lived near that TNT area. They saw red lights overhead, and when she went to investigate, they said it landed near their car, and Bennett noticed that it looked like a man, but its legs were covered in feathers. red eyes, its wings were drawn, and it had no neck, or it had its neck down in some way. She couldn't run, she said she couldn't look away, and when she finally did get herself to turn around and face away from the thing, she said she collapsed in shock. Newspapers then began to pick up this story and report on it. One anonymous writer named the creature the Mothman at that moment, inspired actually by Batman.
Oh.
So police dispatches were interrupted at periodic times. Some even heard screaming on their radios. Many people had malfunctioning cars or appliances. The Scarberrys, who we talked about earlier, said they heard strange beeps and large garbled noises around their trailer at night that led them to move, actually, into their parents' home. And some other people said they saw UFO sightings. Many people claim that they had doors opening and closing on their own. Many Mothman witnesses actually received strange phone calls and visitors to their home. These strange visitors that kept appearing at people's houses were the supposed men in black. These men in black started showing up in town. In fact, even before the appearance of Mothman, citizens were reporting UFO sightings and these visitations from the supposed men in black. The last detail that I think is interesting about the men in black is that they were always described as awkward, socially awkward, translucent, maybe very fair skin, and had oddly long fingers. Some people, and this is kind of diving into the men in black topic in general, some people wager that these are aliens or a different species that live among us, but that's for another episode. So now comes the tragic event that happened to Silverbridge. You might have heard of this. So Silverbridge is the bridge between Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, which is in Ohio. And on December 15th, 1967, this was a little over a year after these major sightings, Silverbridge collapsed. It occurred during rush hour when lots of people were out holiday shopping. 37 cars in total were halted on this bridge, and the bridge began to shake. 64 people fell into the water below, and unfortunately 46 of them passed away. Some people blame Mothman for what happened, claiming that they saw Mothman on the bridge before the collapse. Others claim that they heard a sonic boom right before the collapse, but there's no evidence of this. So that is the story of Mothman.